And if you like, which I'm sure Blake is going to do, you're welcome to do it in the following way. Write a bunch of paragraphs that are about 100 words each, and that's fine, because there will be a flow together. It's all going in one place, and it's going derivatively. But the point is, it'll end up getting you a paper that would be maybe 8 or 10 paragraphs to add up to 1,000 words. Each of them just a little over 100 words. That, for instance, 100 words might talk about Hume envisions philosophy. Another 100 words, probably a little more, would be that he believes that this shows certainty of philosophy is impossible. And then 100, 100, 100, 100, 100, 100, and that, I think, is a much better way to do it. It doesn't get that life in there, which, you know, some people are getting like D's because they're writing a bunch of life. Well, it's pretty easy to do it if you're not sure what exactly to focus on. So, one way is just follow this pattern. Now, I certainly recommend you not have a whole essay be one paragraph, but if you, obviously it's just an option, but I think it might be a good one. For one thing, if you don't like 1,000 words, it's like washing an elephant one piece at a time. So just do it as, in other words, the Kant conceived of a middle ground. Well, I'm not too big on these words, I'll simplify them as much as I can, but just look at it as writing an ABC. And with all of this, you're welcome to simplify it as much as possible. For instance, Kant's stuff is pretty complicated. So for instance, he talks about space-time and causality. Probably the easiest thing to do is forget about causality, because it'll make it simpler. He talks about regulatory ideas. Oh, he talks about synthetic a priori or synthetic a posteriori. Those two words really you could drop and call it before time and after time. Not nature-nurture, but before time and after time. So that's where Kant's going. Kant is extremely famous. He's famous for a number of things, but he certainly rechanged philosophy. And with rechanging philosophy, he kind of reshaped all the social sciences or the humanities from the time he lived, which is about the time of this is the time he lived through the American Revolution, the French Revolution. He was in very totalitarian Germany, but very sympathetic with the American Revolution and the French Revolution. So he is, from that time frame, he kind of changed philosophy and changed thinking in a real sense. If everybody in today's world followed Kant, which I'm glad they don't, because if everybody did, we'd have no more philosophy, which I would be very unhappy about. We'd only have psychology. Kant, literally, well, he didn't know he was doing it, but Kant really reduced philosophy to psychology. What Kant gives you is psychology. He didn't mean it that way. He thought he was doing philosophy. He thought he was coming up with a response to Hume. He thought he was coming up with an absolute philosophy. What he was really coming up with is pretty much modern-day psychology. Interestingly, the ideas that he had have all turned out to be rather testable, rather true, rather, in other words, as the years go by, as we learn more about psychology, or via medicine, things about the nature and structure of the brain and so forth, the more we realize that Kant seems to be right, in a whole lot of ways. So anyway, that's where we're going. I think the Hume is certainly easy, no problem there. The Kant, I'd say, is a booger or whatever you want to call it. It's pretty tough. And then the third point is should be no problem at all. So what do we got? Okay. Let's see. Well, let's just start with David Hume, and then we'll get to this words nature nurture. Okay. David Hume was a young man living in Scotland. He wrote a book as a young man, and the book he wrote had a profound influence on Immanuel Kant. Kant was an old man at that point. He was in far, far east Germany, and he was 56 years old when he read this book. Now, In today's world, 56 is not old. But in this day, it was because life expectancy was a lot shorter. People weren't living 80 and 90 and being helpful and being healthy at that point. So Kant was, for all practical purposes, at the end of his career. But he got both frustrated, I'm sure, but also inspired by this book, and then wrote for quite a while and had quite an interesting career. But what he responded to was this book by David Hume. What's interesting is his response, his desire, obviously, was to refute it. In other words, I'm sure what he wanted to do was burn it. But he instead of refuting it, he spent 2 years thinking about it. Then he wrote himself a book called The Critique of Pure Reason. And when he wrote that book, he took the position that Hume was absolutely correct. He didn't disagree with a word. He just thought Hume left something out. Hello, Ned. He just thought Hume left something out. And so that's, give you a little advance notice here. What he thought Hume did was leave out a distinction that could be made right here. That's why we talk about Kant conceived of a middle ground. In other words, Kant thinks Hume was dead on with everything he wrote, but that he simply, there was a middle ground that he hadn't considered, but it was from a different perspective entirely. So, here we go. Influence of David Hume. Hume was a young Scotsman, and that matters because it turns out the tradition of England and the British Isles had always been, and the United States has followed it pretty much ever since, had always been following an approach to philosophy which was always teleological, directed, non-certain. In other words, the work of Aristotle, or the work of other individuals that are teleological in their direction, St. Thomas Aquinas. That was the kind of philosophy Hume was a part of. That's what he was educated in. That's what he thought was interesting. He thought there was no certainty in philosophy. Why? Because he followed a tradition that it's ashes to ashes, dust to dust. You learn what you can, but you're not going to get it all, and there simply is no absolutism. But the continent of Europe, particularly certainly Germany, but basically the whole continent of Europe, was defending the fact that certainty in philosophy was possible. In other words, it was a simple academic debate, if you will, between the British Isles and Europe. But it was a real one, and it had a tradition that went way, way back. And basically it was the distinction between, do you want to do philosophy like Aristotle, which is teleological and direction, and directed, but not, there's no final solution? Or do you want to look at it top-down, which would be people like Plato, Descartes, and lots of other individuals that are rationalist philosophers? In other words, a rationalist philosopher is going to give you a theory of the world which they've dreamed up, and then they're going to try to show that it explains everything in the world and see if you want to go with the program. Now, Hume thought that was somehow ridiculous, and it is somehow ridiculous, but the point is how to express that. That's what Hume managed to do, and did it quite clearly, so it shouldn't be hard to understand. In other words, a rationalist philosophy is basically just giving you a bunch of definitions. Plato says a form is, and then he's got a definition over here. The problem is, there aren't any forms, and there aren't any of these definitions. The thing doesn't make any sense. Well, how to say that? Well, perhaps people should have thought about it a long time before, but for better or for worse, they didn't think about it until David Hume wrote this book. What he did was divide philosophy into two camps. He couldn't go and talk about every single philosopher. There are thousands of them, like there are thousands of any type of approach. So he divided philosophy into two approaches. No one's ever disagreed that that's really the only two that work. At that point, now in today's world, one can be a Kantian, and there are some pretty significant Kantians, and maybe there are a couple other possibilities, but the point is, at this point, there were just two approaches to philosophy as we get to, say, about 1750 or so. So, about 1750, there were two approaches. Hume divides philosophy between those two approaches. The two approaches, if you will, are going to be, if you will, England and Europe, or They're going to be Aristotle and Plato. And here's how it works. First of all, he's got some lingo. I don't think you can drop the lingo. Synthetic and analytic are his words. They're carried over into here to this synthetic a priori thing. And I think that much of Hume and Kant you probably need. But in any case, Hume says there's a synthetic approach to philosophy. That's his terminology. But the word synthetic is a pretty good idea. What he means by it is a synthetic approach of philosophy means you synthesize it, you put it together. You put it together in the experiences of your life. As you get older, you learn some more stuff, you change your mind, you develop some type of thinking or other. Before you get so darn set in your ways, you don't think about much of anything. But whatever, you synthesize some type of an approach in life. And that is clearly based in experience. A perfect example is Aristotle. Aristotle absolutely thinks that way. He thinks that life is teleological, because he thought man was inherently good, but he thought you could almost prove that. And he thought that you would build on stuff, but you'd have to realize people were going to improve what you did. So it's clearly based experience. That's all there is. Aristotle didn't think there was any magic out there. It just simply was your life and whether or not you focused on working in some area and how you built a theory accordingly. So there's a synthetic approach based in experience. There's no certainty in that approach. Hume didn't want any certainty. So he was quite happy expressing half philosophy or something like half as a synthetic approach. Synthetic meaning you synthesize your experiences. Okay, the other approach, and this was where his little bit of creativity came in, and that is what he called an analytic approach. And that was very clever. What he proposed is that the way Plato did his philosophy, the way Descartes did his philosophy, Plato's a clearest. A form is, and there's a definition over here. Form is a word, and then it has a definition. What Hume suggested is that's actually analytic, because neither side says anything. It's A equals A. In other words, it's clever, and it looks like it's A equals B, but it's not. It's just A equals A. So in other words, it's 2 plus 2 equals 4, which doesn't really show you anything if you know how to do math already. It's simply an analytic approach, meaning it's mathematics. But it's mathematics in a purely expressing equality type of mathematics. So, an analytic approach. I guess I could illustrate that again with, I think the clearest way to illustrate it is Plato. Plato had forms, he had different forms. The form of the good is defined in a certain way. The point is, there is no form of the good. And so the definition is words. All it is saying, this word is, and then you define it, but you're not doing anything. You're just having A equals A. That's what Hume suggested. It was a darn good idea. What he suggested is that because of that, in other words, the synthetic approach has no certainty. There's no certainty in philosophy because it's a synthetic approach. And then he took the idea that the analytic approach, there's no certainty in the analytic approach. The reason is the analytic approach is empty. It's worthless. So what he then said is certainty of philosophy is impossible. At this point, that was pretty radical because for whatever reason, people always believed that somehow or other philosophy was the one game, they call it the queen of the sciences, that was supposed to give you certainty. The game was, across a lot of philosophy, that somehow or other philosophy would give you the kind of certainty that maybe the bias of religion wouldn't give you, or maybe the mistakes of science wouldn't give you. Somehow there was a certainty that somehow could be for sure forever. And for better or for worse, that really never made sense from the beginning, but Hume got rid of it. Interestingly, since David Hume, there really have been almost no... Anyway, so that's what Hume does. Again, I don't think there's any problem with this piece of the essay. You've got to frame it that you're talking about Immanuel Kant, but then I think it's actually really easy to say. But in order to talk about Kant, we need to go back to David Hume, who he took, because this is like 50% of what Kant's going to end up doing. So if you just say, this is very much what he did, and then you just explain. I think it's extremely clear. I don't know if maybe somebody might be uncomfortable through an analytic approach, or talk about it, but other than that, it should be really, really helpful. People, for better or for worse again, had thought that, after all, the world's had a whole lot of search for certainty. The certainty of religion, the absoluteness that nothing can be wrong with the New Testament, and on and on and on. Certainty is something people want. They don't really want change and uncertainty. So that quest supposedly belonged to philosophy, and it, rather fascinatingly, Hume, as a very young man, got rid of it. Just plain got rid of it. And it's interesting, Hume was so proud of himself that he gave up philosophy, decided, oh, philosophy is worthless, because I've already shown everything there is to show. It's learn as you go, have your best theory, and he became, interestingly, the best historian of history of Britain that ever lived. Tremendous historian, spent his life very much as an academic. Wrote an 800-page book on the history of England, which, if nothing else is detailed, I certainly haven't read it, but in any case, I guess it covered the history of England pretty good. So, David Hume, any questions about that?
I have a question.
I think, yes, ma'am.
So the synthetic approach is based on Aristotle, and the analytic is on Plato, or did I get it
Yes,
reversed?
you got it right.
Okay.
And I think it's very clear what Aristotle's approach is.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it should be clear what Plato's approach is. It's definitional.
So if he becomes the essay, if it'd be safe to say if we wrote a little bit on the synthetic approach as it refers to Aristotle and the analytic as it refers to Plato, to kind of give us the 1,000 words, would that be?
Assuming you do 100, it's probably 100, 100, and then maybe 400 words, whatever. The point is, I think saying it's Aristotle and saying it's Plato is a way to be clear with it. Now, not to dwell too long on Aristotle or Plato, but just at least to mention and maybe show one quick example or something.
Okay.
In other words, this part doesn't need, I don't think, to be complicated at all for anybody.
Okay.
But this one will give you something to do. In case you're bored in the next couple of weeks, you can spend a lot of time being clear about that.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay. Let's march on. Kant conceived of a middle ground. Now, let me start off with, this is where actually he's going to come up with the nature-nurture controversy. Let me explain why. Now, you might say, where am I going to stick the nature-nurture controversy? I don't have the faintest idea. Even though I wanted to organize it real nicely for Plato, I don't know where to stick the nature-nurture controversy. Somewhere. It might be good to do it right there. Somehow, you got to keep it to a minimal amount of words, because this is a bear to walk through. But probably the nature-nurture controversy makes it easier, and then you can decide where to keep it as simple as you can. For instance, ditch causality, just make it as easy as you can. So, Kant thinks he came up with this is how the nature-nurture controversy is going to come about. Kant studied this book for 2 years. Again, I'm sure he sought and thought of ways to review, but he just couldn't find any. So he finally gave up and admitted that the book was perfect. And I'm sure he wasn't happy with that. The reason he wasn't happy, by the way, this guy was 56 years old. He was obviously near the end of his career. He was looking at retirement. He was happily living in Germany. He was in a small town. It was a big deal. And Germany, education, particularly in the smaller towns, is unbelievably important. So a professor is a really big deal in one of those towns. And at this time, he was a big deal indeed. But the thing is, he'd been teaching, not Plato, not Descartes, but he'd been teaching a German. The German happened to be named Leibniz. And Leibniz had a theory. It was a rationalist theory. It was a totally nonsensical rationalist theory. Kant had been teaching it as gospel throughout his entire career. And all of a sudden, this book showed that everything he'd been teaching and believed in his whole life was mistaken. That would be a tad frustrating. Now, it's good if you're a scientist to be corrected, but, knowing that everything you did is total nonsense is a bit of a bummer, I would think. So he clearly wasn't happy about it. But he thought he found an answer. Here's the thing. He's a German. And Germans, whatever else they're doing, they're absolutely interested in certainty. They're interested in the certainty of making money. They're interested in the certainty of building the best thing better than anybody else. They are, they're good mathematicians. They're good detailed people. They have some very strong characteristics. One of them is certainty is a part of the German culture and the German mindset. It's not an insult to them, it's a compliment to them. They do a heck of a job. Today's world, Merkel gets to, Germany has so darn much money, they get to complain about everybody and how they don't manage their money well. And, we got to get rid of Greece because they're not worth anything. But anyway, Germanic certainty. Kant wanted the certainty, so he wanted to somehow show there was certainty in philosophy. How did he think he did it? He suggested that this approach by Hume, okay, now here we go as the middle ground. He suggested the approach by Hume was a matter of how we know stuff. In other words, this was how we figure it out. Okay, how you figure out Aristotle by living your life. That's what Aristotle thought. And he thought that if you live your life and try to do a good job, you'll realize the truth of this teleology and the whole bit. So that's how you do philosophy. The idea of Plato or Descartes was the same thing. It was how you would get your answers. According to Plato, you'd get your answers by discovering those forms by the time you're 50-something years old. And then you would know the truth for sure. But that's how you would live your life. You could be a humanist if you get the proper education and get the proper knowledge. So that was how you did things. Now, where's Kant coming from? Kant suggested there's something that's forgotten. And it would seem like his suggestion for the time would have been utterly worthless. But it turned out to be tremendously shaping of Western civilization. His idea was, Hume forgot to ask when you came up with these ideas. In other words, Hume forgot to make a time distinction. Hume looked at philosophy from how you did it. But what about when you do it? Well, the thing is, that sounds ridiculous. Because, for instance, if you happen to be interested in philosophy when you're 10 years old, not many people are interested in philosophy when they're 10 years old, but if you happen to be, that's one thing, and okay, then you're interested in philosophy. If you happen to be interested in philosophy and you're 40 years old, the point is, what difference does it make when you do it? The point is, where do you stand? Where do you stand on religion, etc.? What difference does it make when in the dickens you do it? So this would seem like a worthless distinction. But the way Kant did it turned out to be a tremendous distinction. And here's why. He basically is going to suggest that there's a time distinction that actually matters. The time distinction between whether you're 10 and whether you're 40 is nothing. But he thought there was a genuine distinction with humans. Now, Kant was still before an age that had any respect for animals. Animals aren't doing any thinking. Nothing else but man is doing any thinking. But Kant realized that the human is a very complicated entity with a complicated brain. And he thought that there could be a couple ways in which this individual would experience things. One would be the nature. Now, he doesn't say nature, nurture. We'll explain how that comes up. But one would be your nature. In other words, is there anything in being a human being that you bring with you when you're born? In other words, the time distinction he makes is before you're born and after you're born. And then you're alive. And his idea is that maybe we humans are, if you will, hardwired with certain characteristics, certain ideas that we can't avoid eventually thinking about. Now, we don't think about them when we're a little tiny baby, but supposedly we think about them at some point in our life. That's his notion. And interestingly, science keeps building toward the fact that this may very well be true. But whether or not it ever builds it as true for sure, the point is Kant had an interesting idea. Distinction between the way that the structure of your brain and what you may think, and then the experience of your life. Now, the reason that was important is that would give him the certainty he wanted. Why would he give him the certainty? If there's a structure of your brain that's absolute and it's shared by every human being, in other words, every human being is going to have, in Kant's view, a different philosophy because they're going to live their life and live their life in a different way. So everybody's got their own individual philosophy. But he thinks they have to have certain ideas as a part of that life structure. They don't have any choice. So he thought that because of that structure of the mind, which he thinks is there, he thinks that therefore that is the certain piece. That's the certainty that Hume refuted. There is certainty. The problem, what Hume showed is that certainty, just definitionally, is order. What Kant showed, or thought he showed, and maybe he did, is that certainty, if it can be the structure of your mind, then you're going to live a life with that mind. And if with that mind you can learn things, do things, you live in the real world, you use it. So therefore, there's a middle ground that actually, there's a middle ground between these two. And that middle ground is that this is the certainty, and this is the being able to actually do something with the certainty. Not define it, simply live it and experience it. So what he's trying to do is have a structure of the mind instead of like a form of Plato, and then say the structure of the mind is going to make all humans philosophical in a certain way, and then they'll live their lives and expand on that in various unique ways. That was probably totally unclear. Let's, any questions about that? One question might be, so what did you say? Anyway, any questions? Yes, John.
What was the name of the book that he wrote after he was reviewing it for 2 years?
Critique of Pure Reason. And by the way, it's typical Kant. Extremely difficult to read. Just very complicated book with, I think, an awfully complicated text. Particularly, though, Kant seems to have had a personality because he's quite the letter writer. Turns out he had a long-term correspondence for years and years with Ben Franklin. That's amazing. I mean, he spoke, I guess, perfect English. Ben Franklin strikes me as I think most people think of Ben Franklin as a very practical dude that wouldn't mess with somebody talking obscure philosophy. I mean, Ben Franklin seemed like a pretty practical human being, and somehow or other, Kant and he had this long correspondence. So somehow Kant had a personality somewhere, but he hit it pretty well in his writing. So critique.
Who was that? Who was that person?
Ben Franklin.
Ben Franklin. Oh, he's an American, kind of a hero. Kind of a strange hero. We got strange heroes. Yeah, yes, John.
So, hold on. You go, because I need to word my question.
All right. I just have a simple question. What was Hume's book that Kant responded to? What was it?
Hume's book. I'll be darned if I don't know what Hume's book.
It's all right. I'll look it up. Thank you.
So,
So just say I don't
An
remember.
inquiry concerning human understanding? Was it the inquiry concerning?
Thank you, thank you.
Concerning,
And inquiry concerning human understanding.
thank you.
It's a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, yeah.
so Kant agreed with, or did not agree with, believes this shows that certainty is in philosophy is impossible. Did Kant agree with that or disagree with it?
He thought that Hume was right
Yes.
if the certainty of philosophy was only definition.
Okay.
But he thought that Hume was wrong because there was another way to get certainty. It was to realize there's a structure of your brain which we all presumably share if we're normal human beings. And if we're not, we simply are lacking something, which is unfortunate, but that might be the case. But basically, all normal human beings that are able to function in society are, he thought, going to share a certain amount of certainty. That it's the structure of the human mind, which it really makes a certain amount of sense. I mean, after all, there's a big old chart out on the wall. It's a rather fascinating example of the complexity of our brain, where, there's an auditory part and a sensory, all of those things, which we all share in common. I mean, we all got that same brain out there. And maybe that brain leads to certain ideas that we'll think, and those ideas might be philosophical. That's what. So he disagreed with the certainty, and then he came around and got it again.
Okay.
So the ideas that we all may think that are philosophical, that was the certainty that he was implying as far as
The certainty that he thought we were going to end up with.
or
The
the
middle road. The middle road.
Interestingly, he did a little bit of a cheat sheet on it, because he only thought that really the only real certainty with the brain was this space and time stuff, which is, that is a certainty with our brain. But then he said this stuff, which is philosophical, isn't quite certain, but it's dang near certain. Well, so he didn't ever say these ideas are how the structure of the mind. He said they're not, but there's something that almost puts them there. Kant's just full of complexity.
Did he specify certain things that we have in common? Did he say, we all ask, why am I here? We all need to live in a higher being of some sort? I mean, did he say what those things were that we all have in
Yeah.
common? Or was it
Examples.
just general?
He proved we have these things in common. But he thought that these things, although he can't prove we're going to think about them, he thinks that we're in deep doo-doo if we don't. So that's where in other words, he's not. It's interesting. He builds his theory. His whole idea was to retain certainty. But when he was said and done, all he managed to do was retain certainty on space and time and say the other stuff is probably certain, pretty darn certain, but I don't know.
So what does he mean by certainty through space and time? Like everybody has.
Oh, yeah,
Everybody wants to know.
that's something we need to talk about.
We'll get to that.
Detail. So, okay, what we've got so far is the influence of David Hume. Hopefully the Hume makes sense. I think people have asked the right questions. And then we'll start on the KANT. There's a time distinction. The time distinction is a priori, a posteriori. Those are two separate words. Again, Latin. Before time, in other words, in your nature. After time, in your nurture. So, tell you what, let's take a break for 20 minutes. When we come back, I guess we need to do two things. One, I need to show, I think to show how this led into the nature-nurture controversy, because it led directly, and then to go ahead and get to what it is he thought was part of the structure of the mind. So let's take a 20-minute break. 20 after, we'll come back.